Hello everybody, today on the channel, if you're going to squeeze in one last review of the year, why not make it something special? And they rarely come as special as this, the Bentley Arnage T. Easily the best thing to come out of a divorce in a very, very long time. So then, what is it we have here today? Well, the Arnage T is nothing if not interesting. I apologise for the fact I'm filming in what is far beyond marginal light, and I think now fully qualifies as dying light, but I am happy nonetheless to be bringing you this magnificent motor car. Now, the Arnage was introduced in 1998 and retired in 2010. At a quick glance, you'd see it was Bentley's then flagship four-door saloon, available as either short wheelbase or long wheelbase, and along the way they did a couple of other variants, the T being the sportiest of them all. But you see, that tells you next to nothing about the origins of the Arnage. The car was conceived potentially as early as the late 1980s, but certainly in the 1990s. And it was designed, as was tradition for the time, in tandem with its Rolls-Royce counterpart. And at that point, the two firms had been intertwined for some 70 years. The idea being that the Rolls-Royce was the more luxury-orientated offering and the Bentley the sportier one, but they were essentially the same car using the same chassis and same engines, just tweaked differently. And though for some time in their history, Bentley had been something of an afterthought, the brand saw a resurgence in the 1980s, thanks to the popularity of things like the Turbo. And so, for the first all-new cars the firm had produced in near 2 decades, Vickers, their owner, went to town and decided to make the Bentley a distinctly different offering. It was still going to use the same chassis and basic underpinnings as its Rolls-Royce counterpart, but the engine were to be totally different. And, in a break with tradition, both models were now going to outsource their power plant. There was some discussion as to where they were going to get a pair of suitable engines, and they eventually settled on BMW, with the Silver Seraph receiving a naturally aspirated V12, which has remained until this day a hallmark of Rolls-Royce, and the Bentley getting a twin-turbo version of a BMW V8. But alas, the two cars launched just in time for one of the most famous spats in automotive history, because Vickers decided they no longer wanted Rolls-Royce and Bentley, and so sold them off, with everybody expecting BMW to be the buyer. Now, I've told this story a number of times, so I'll give you the short version. What actually happened was that VW stepped in and made an offer they could not refuse, but on account of a little bit of automotive bitterness, BMW did manage to scupper things a little bit with regards to Rolls-Royce. And so what happened was BMW acquired the rights to the Rolls-Royce name and to make their cars. VW, meanwhile, got just about everything else, including the factory at Crewe, which today is still home to the brand. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about the history of Bentley in particular, I did a whole video celebrating this magnificent British marque, including a visit to the factory where I talk about what happened, how they wound up there, and a few things that I myself did not know that I learned along the way. But back to the Arnage, and it had a very immediate problem. All new though it may have been, it also had up front an engine built by one of VW's main rivals. And though they did later reach an agreement, VW were naturally concerned that at any point in time BMW could choose to turn off supply for what was now the competitor to their Rolls-Royce brand. With time being very much of the essence, rather than look to the VW catalogue and see if they had an engine that was either suitable or could be adapted, Bentley instead looked to their own and dragged out of retirement the admittedly recently tucked away 6 3/4 litre V8, an engine which could trace its roots back to the 1950s. However, it was not simply a case of just taking the engine and stuffing it in the front of the Arnage. This car was never designed to accommodate it, and although they could make it work, that was an engine very much showing its age. To make even the same power and torque as the BMW unit did take a little bit of work, though not too much. This is in spite of the BMW unit having some 2 and a bit litres less capacity. And this is to say nothing of the fact that once the Rolls-Royce unit was installed, the car now weighed some near 300 kilos more than with the BMW one. So they continued to sell the BMW variant, revised that, and then called it the Green Label. Meanwhile, the old Rolls-Royce V8 powered cars became known as the Red Label. Knowing this was simply a stopgap solution, work continued on the old V8 engine to try and get it up to scratch. And the first car to receive it was in fact the Arnage RL, the long wheelbase variant. Clearly not content with the already massive 5.4 metre long short wheelbase, to put that into some context, the same length as a modern day Ghost, they did a long wheelbase, which weighed in at 5.65 metres long. And I gotta say, even this is a beast. That must be an absolute monster. Nevertheless, the important thing about the RL is the fact that the 6.75 litre engine it received was actually radically different to the one used in the Red Label. So out went the big single turbo, in came a pair of smaller twins, and the engine management system was completely replaced too, making it a leaner, meaner and greener engine. Which is important because Bentley knew they wanted to carry on using it for a fair while. Now, don't forget, if you're thinking of buying a dirt cheap old Bentley, make sure to use CarVertical, the super-powered super search that cross-references a number of databases from around the globe to give you all the information you want to know in one easy-to-read report. It takes just 60 seconds, and all you need is either a reg number or a VIN. Even better, for 20% off, don't forget to use my discount code JAYEMM. The Red Label was then revised and turned into the Bentley Arnage R, by which point it now had some 400 horsepower. And then, alongside that, in 2002, you got this, the Arnage T, which made 450 horsepower. But whenever it comes to discussing the old 6 3/4 litre, power really is not the number you want to look at. Instead, that is torque. And here in T, guys, the car has a frankly staggering 645 pounds-feet. That's 875 Newton meters. Which later, in 2007, when the car was given a much more modern 6-speed ZF gearbox, was then uprated to 1,000 Newton meters. Or to put it another way, 738 pounds-feet. That's a lot. Sadly, before that 2007 update, all other variants of the 6 3/4 litre engine Arnage have to make do with this elderly General Motors 4-speed. Now, in truth, it's an okay gearbox, it's fine, it's adequate, but it is the sort of thing that was designed to go in, say, your Chevy Suburban, and not a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley. And presumably the reasons for choosing the gearbox were simple. It was readily available, it was well known for being very, very durable, and they were familiar with it. Some of the old Bentley and Rolls-Royce models having used it as far back as the early 1990s. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, I am making a great mistake, because here I am sat in a Bentley worrying about the time, looking at my lovely NOVE watch, now on my left wrist for all of you at home, and seeing the fact the light is fading. I suspect some of the drive-bys might be done at night. And I'm missing the point, because I'm talking to you about numbers. The thing about a Bentley is the way it makes you feel. Now, I will admit, much like in the Silver Seraph, which I have also driven, the first thing this makes me feel is really tall. In spite of the fact that this was an all-new car, and as far as I can tell it was, it does feel a little bit old-fashioned when you get in it. Rarely have I known something that is so big feel quite so tight in here. Not in terms of length, there's plenty of legroom for all involved, but in terms of height. I put my sunglasses on, and the car will try to take them off. However, ignoring that for a moment, as I really should, this interior is absolutely spectacular. Now, what I can't convey to you is the smell, and it is the smell of opulence. This thing is fantastic. I'd never ever tire of being in this. And although it isn't really to my taste being in black over black, once you see it in person, it is rather magnificent. In 2005, these cars were facelifted, and this is a very early example of that facelift. And the front end was made to look a lot less like the old Silver Serif style one and more like the then contemporary Continental GT and later the Flying Spur and that like. I think it's fabulous, and it's quite traditional Bentley, having the 4 headlights. But inside, there's leather on the leather. The lambswool carpets are 2 inches thick. Everything is nice and soft. You get in a modern Bentley, and yes, there are acres of leather, of course there are, but it all just feels a little firmer. It feels like getting in a Porsche, where they've just stuck leather on top of plastic. It's not the same. This is proper. I love these machine turn sections, the beautiful walnut burr wood. This is awesome. Now, this particular car is owned by a lovely pair of gents who actually brought it to my show stand at Helmingham Hall earlier in the year. There is Ethan, who is in his early 20s, and there is Richard, who is, I think, about 5 decades his senior. Now, Richard previously had an Arnage R, which is the slightly more comfort and luxury orientated version. Ethan had a Jaguar XJ Series 1, which he brought to the channel, and you may have previously seen. He sold that, and thinking of what to get next, Richard said, well, why don't we go halves on an Arnage T? And initially he didn't want a black one, having had the blue R, which I must say was stunning, but eventually he settled on this, and I think it's fair to say the pair of them really, really enjoy it. And it does warm my heart to see 2 people that otherwise would never, ever have been friends having a real close connection through the magic of the automobile. Now, one thing I couldn't find out when I was trying to research this car is exactly what kind of suspension it has. Older Bentleys will have used a Citroen-derived setup, but this, I believe, does not. This does, though, have a button down here marked Sport, and I am told that, amongst other things, it will firm up the suspension. So, let's press that. Yep, we are now in Sport. Get it round this bend where we're going to have some better visibility, and see what this car is like when you try and ask a lot of a 2.5-ton car on a damp, greasy road. Foot down and, whoa, blimey, she goes. I'll give her that. In fact, even the gearbox responds fairly well. You are, though, quite aware of the fact that you are piloting a very, very large machine, and you are taking up a lot of the road. Feels brilliant, though. It really does. Oh, yep, back end just sliding around a little bit. Not particularly big tyres on this. Only 255s. They're nice new Pirellis, but a lot is being asked of them, it has to be said. Thing is, though, this is doing a much better job than I thought that it might. Not making a lot in the way of noise. Redline is not particularly high either, just over 4,500 RPM. Oh, and if you want numbers, when this was new, it would have set its first owner back something in the order of £170,000. And that's before a trip to the options list, where they specified things like this being a level 2 Mulliner car. I don't know, I'm clueless. Apparently it's some frippery on the bumper, maybe some of the stitching in here, that's usually a Mulliner thing, but otherwise, honestly, I could not tell you. For some context, at that point in time, that's the same money you'd have to spend to get yourself into a Lamborghini Murcielago, the same money you'd have to spend to get into a Ferrari 612 Scaglietti, which would run rings around this, a top-of-the-line Jaguar XJ Super V8 with the long wheelbase and supercharged engine. That would have been some £100,000 cheaper. In fact, the only things that would have been more money for sure would have been a Pagani Zonda, a Koenigsegg, or a Bristol Fighter. Yeah. This, £170,000, Bristol Fighter, £250,000. And people wonder why they went out of business. Incidentally, if you are one of the people that recently watched my old Bristol Fighter video, which is 2 years old, and then the last month had another 15,000 views, thank you very much. Going to put this out of sport mode for a little bit. I can't say it feels like it does masses to the suspension. There's a little bit of bounce in it. There's always a bit more than you think with these things. Yeah, is it doing something? Yeah, maybe. I suspect it mainly makes the gearbox a lot keener to change down, but with only the 4 ratios and so much torque on tap, I'm not really sure it's all that important. It is, though, a very old-fashioned automatic gearbox. Very keen to let the torque converter do a lot of work. Doesn't rev nicely and progressively like a more modern one would. I think if I were to go and buy one of these cars, I probably would want the later 2007 one with the extra torque, the 6-speed ZF, or a little bump in power too. Those were 500 horses. But to get into one of those, you are going to pay something of a premium. The cheapest 2007 onwards was around 30-odd thousand pounds. If you're feeling brave, you can get something just like this for more like £20,000. And if you would like an earlier car with the BMW engine, or you're happy to take a risk, you can get one of these for as little as £10,000 to £12,000. And that's very, very tempting indeed. And I've thought about it a lot. But there are a few things putting me off, including the fact that many of the early cars will not be ULEZ compliant. They will be thirsty. I did not ask the guys how much fuel this drinks, but I know the answer is a lot. It weighs 2.5 tons, it has a 50-something-year-old engine in it, and it's trying to be sporty. That is not a recipe for frugality. But let's be honest here, fuel consumption is the least of your concerns when it comes to buying an old Bentley, because if you're burning fuel, that means you're using the car, which means that it works. When I went to look at what can go wrong with these things, well, naturally the answer was everything. And there are a few things that are worse than others, including the fact that apparently if the brake pipes get bad, it can get to the point where the entire car can be considered a write-off. Because they take such a complicated and convoluted route, you really don't want to have to try and fix them. Getting off the lines, nice, easy. This bend here is very greasy, but you know what? The car's impressing me with its grip. Back in sport mode, I think. Yeah, it's not blistering pace, but it's effortless performance, to put it that way. Steering is very, very light. Brakes, long travel pedal, classic Bentley. Although it is worth noting, certainly in original guise, the Rolls-Royce engine cars took a lot longer to stop than the BMW ones. Oh, it's only sheep over there. I thought I saw some deer. Once it's got up to speed, it's very happy to keep piling it on. And were it not for the awful economy, I'd be very, very tempted to take one of these across Europe, because it would be magnificent. The other thing, of course, is that there are a great number of cars out there which are smaller than this, but still have just as much room. So the boot's a good size, but not enormous. Not really vastly larger than in, say, a Jaguar XJ or any number of other luxury cars. This also doesn't have the features or technology of a 7 Series and S-Class, and those can of course be had for a lot less, but you could argue also will go wrong. I like the fact that so much in here is hidden, even half the HVAC and the stereo, can't see it. There's a nice little remote in a special leather pouch down here for the stereo. You've got plenty of creature comforts though, parking sensors, you've got dual zone climate control, electric adjustment for all of the seats, electric windows of course, and it's a magnificent slice of old school luxury this. But you've got to be brave to buy one. I do think though one day it has to be done. Now when this was retired in 2010, it morphed into the magnificent Mulsanne, which carried on the 6.75 litre V8 engine. By which point really, I think they were doing it for nostalgia reasons. I know people love this engine, but to me, I've never understood the appeal. It's big, it's heavy, it's not particularly powerful. Yes, it's very, very torquey, but so should everything that displaces near 7 litres with a pair of turbos be. It doesn't really make a great noise, and nor is it particularly reliable. Early examples did head gaskets for fun. These, I believe, chewed camshafts in their early days. But there is a charm, there is a magnificence about this that no modern Bentley can come even close to. And so, for those brave enough, for Ethan and for Richard, I say, gentlemen, well done. Good choice. Even the black is starting to grow on me. Anyway, that is all that remains to be said from me. As ever, a big thanks to them for bringing their car out, and to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.